Okay, welcome everyone. I think this is our eighth webinar of this year, and we are very happy to invite my old friend, Dr. Ali Tohidi, from US San Jose State University, and he will soon move to University of Maryland next year. And Ali has been working on the wildland fire problem, I think, since your PhD, starting from the firebrand transportation problem. And now you are expanding it to like larger scale wildland modeling. And he's expert in the combustion and thermofluid system. And I think in today's talk, he will share his recent studies about how to use multi-scale computational approach to simulate very complex wildland fire behaviors and impact. Okay, now the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Jinyan, for this nice introduction. And let me start sharing my screen. Are you able to see the screen?
Yes. Looks
okay,
good.
Great. Shall we start?
Go ahead.
All right. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for attending today. My name is Ali Tohidi, and I guess Dr. Huang, I've already made a nice introduction. So I skip it. Today I'm going to talk about a multi-scale computational approach in wildfire modeling and its impacts. But before I start, I would like to acknowledge my collaborators, Dr. Nigel Kay, Dr. Kochansky, and Dr. Kubziar, because some of the material that you're going to see today is in collaboration with their groups. And without their contribution, the work wouldn't be possible. I'd like to also acknowledge our team, starting with our former postdoc, Dr. Kim, who's recently back to Korea, starting a career in industry, and our graduate students in the lab. And mentioning that Behi recently, just maybe 3-4 hours ago, defended her master thesis, and I'm going to present some of her work. So very exciting. Most of the activities in my lab are focused on understanding complexities in wildfire behavior and its impact. And one of the important problems that we would like to answer, or at least contribute in answering, is that what happens that we go from a single ignition point to these large fire weather systems. We call them pyro-CB, short for cumulonimbus fires, such as Creek Fire that happened in 2020 in California. And the answer is the inherent multi-scale and multi-physics processes that happen in wildfire. It ranges from all spread mechanisms that you can think of. And basically, the challenges that we have in understanding the appropriate time and length scales, or maybe the transport regimes. And these are either unknown to us, or they're basically highly expensive to know. So I've tried to kind of summarize the relevant scales of wildfires in this scale plot, where you can see that at the very small spatiotemporal scales, we have these competitive reactions during the depolymerization of the material, which leads to thermal degradation. Then you will have pyrolysis and combustion. And then you will have the formation of the flame scale dynamic. And then a little bit larger, you will see the WUI fires. And then at very larger scales, you have wildfires in the landscape. These are the type of fires that we even see them from satellite images. We have a fairly good understanding of what happens at the small scales, maybe at least up to the flame scale. But in between flame scale to wildfire in the landscape, there are still a lot of knowledge gaps that we need to answer. And the reason for that is, as you're all familiar with, wildfires are getting larger with more impacts. And this is a very important problem for us who live in California to address. So the very first process that I would like to talk about starts with wildfire impacts. This is a phenomenon called pyroaerobiology. And just to define pyroaerobiology, when you look at wildfire smoke, you expect to have some water vapor, some particulate matter. But recently, our collaborator, Dr. Kabziar, and her team sampled from the wildfire smoke using drones, and they effectively cultured those samples in the lab. And if you can see these cultures in the lab, which are basically shown at the bottom left, and compare it with the ambient air, you can see the presence of the bacteria and fungi in the sampled wildfire plume. And they were successful in showing that the sampled wildfire smoke plume has 5 times more particulate matter and also have a lot of fungi and bacteria that get aerosolized, with more than 78% of them viable. Basically, they are still alive and they are active. So they started to hypothesize this fact that maybe wildfires have a very extended impact, which is far beyond the actual site that they happen, and they can be considered as the agent of biological transformation from one location to the other. And as engineers, our task in the collaboration was to be able to provide them with accurate deposition maps using simulations such that they can go and sample the soil. And using the soil samples, they can provide more evidence for this hypothesis. So what we did for modeling this process, we went back to comparing the size of the particles and considering that, and try to characterize the governing equation. So if you look at the size of the particles, these are of the order of 1 micrometer. This is compared with the PM10 and PM2.5 that you can see in this image. So most of these bacteria and fungi, they basically coagulate to these particulate matters, and they get lofted through the plume, and then they travel. So the governing equation on this process is called Langevin dynamics. It's a very simple, or relatively simple process where on the left-hand side you have the particle acceleration, on the right-hand side you have the resultant forces, including the drag, the external forces, and the body forces. In this set of model that we developed, we account for the particle inertia, turbulent diffusion, field forces such as gravity and Brownian motion. We do not account for time based history. We do not consider the particles to be aqueous, which is a good approximation given that these particles emerge from fires, but they can be aqueous in other situations, and we do not account for coagulation. But what we do account for is the balance of forces between different terms of this equation based on the momentum and diffusive Knudsen numbers. And the result is basically this governing equation that you see, which is corrected by Cunningham correction coefficient. And after developing this model, we had this challenge to, all right, how can we kind of integrate it through time? Because the simulations that we need to do are very large scale. And I'm talking about the order of 20 kilometer by 20 kilometer with elevations of up to 10 kilometers in the atmosphere. So usually for coupling the particle solvers with computational CFD models, you wouldn't have a lot of problems if you can kind of fit the simulation mesh into your RAM. But that wasn't the case for us because of the larger scale, spatial scale of the problem, as I mentioned. And for this specific case, we had to couple it with WRF Fire, which is an operational fire weather model that we use in San Jose State, specifically with Dr. Adam Kuchansky, which has an atmospheric grid, and nested in it, we have a fire grid with a smaller cells. So we started to develop a KD3 algorithm. We used it to traverse the grid and retrieve the important information or fields for the given particle position. And this is done basically separate from on the CPU side. And the good thing about it, you can basically just save the grid information once and then always use it. And by that, we are able to extract temperature, heat fluxes, and the 3D velocity fields, and then leave the integration to the GPUs. This model is basically scaled on multi GPUs, and as many GPUs that you have access to, you can just basically use them and run the model with. So once we did that, I'm going to show you a sample of the simulation. On the left-hand side, this is a simulation that we did for Manning Creek, where we have the fire initiated using Warface Fire. And then we randomly release particles in the active fire area. So these pixels that you see are effectively showing you the heat flux from the Warface fire. And these dots that you see are not particles. These are basically areas of 20 meters by 20 meters, where we count the number of particles that we see at that snapshot in time. So these are basically aggregate particles. And if you look at the size of the domain, we are talking about 17 kilometer by 17 kilometer in this case, with a Reynolds number of 5 million, and we had a range of different Knudsen numbers that we released into the domain. On the right-hand side, you see the corresponding deposition maps from this simulation, where we released 500 million particles with randomly generated sizes between 1 to 50 micrometer. As you can see, if you compare the landing locations with the final burn scar or the perimeter, which is shown by the red polygon, you see that most of these deposited particles are landing very close to the kind of a burn scar, especially in areas with higher elevation, which shows the 3D interaction of this process with the terrain and the boundary layer. So you need to actually have all of these in your simulations to have a good estimate of the landing locations. But surprisingly, if you look at the overall trajectory of all the particles that we release in the domain throughout the entire simulation time, which is 2 days, this is the signature that you get. This is a top view. These are the side views, which shows the elevations of maybe 10,000 meters. But surprisingly, only less than 1% of the particles are actually deposited in the domain, and the rest leave the domain. This basically provides more evidence for our collaborators that most of these particles remain aerosolized. They actually leave the domain. So the extended impact of the wildfires is actually in much larger spatial scales, if you want to consider that. And we can use this to do two things. One, for the next round, we will increase the simulation area. And also, this is basically providing more evidence for considering wildfires to be the agent of biological transformations between different regions. We recently published this work in Environmental Science and Technology, and hopefully we can extend it soon in the next year. Now I want to, after talking about the work that we've done on wildfire impacts, I would like to come back to wildfire behavior, and starting with spread mechanisms. For those of us who are not familiar with this process, if you look at the multi-scale nature of the wildfires, and always remember that where we have very large wildfires, then you can zoom in and the landscape scale and then flame scale and so on. You can characterize the spread mechanisms in three dominant modes. One is the convection and basically conduction due to direct flame contact with the field, radiation to the adjacent fields, and also solid mass transport, which we call firebrand shower. And the first mathematical model that considers all these processes is the seminal work done by Rothamel, who basically accounted for all of these. And that study led to the development of a semi-empirical fire model, and then later FARSIGHT, and it is still a backbone of a lot of operational models that we use today. But specifically, I've worked on a process called firebrand shower, which is basically the third mechanism that we talked about. And the process is as follows. During the thermal degradation, the material loses its structural integrity, and part of the material break off from the main structure. They get lofted through the fire plume and travel as a form of these glowing particles that we call them ember or firebrands. And they basically fall, and if upon landing they're still hot enough, they have the potential to start another fire, which we call the spot fire. And this is known to be the fastest and most complex form of wildfire spread. As you can see in these satellite images from campfire that happened in California, it is responsible for more than 50% of the house losses in the US, in the WUI areas, actually. And since it can have a lot of impact and also alter the fire behavior itself because of the short range and long range spotting that you can see the evidence of here. It needs to be understood, but unfortunately, we don't have a lot of physics-based representation in the operational models. We have distributions that are being used, but most of them are based on either small-scale experiments or limited larger-scale simulations. So we need to basically parameterize that and extend this work. And also, finally, we need to really think about a way to account for the contribution of this process in the actual rate of spread, as I mentioned, altering the fire behavior itself. So to give you a background on how I got involved in dealing with this problem, this was the project that I did with Dr. K in Clemson University. And we wanted to develop a model to simulate this process. But after doing a little bit of literature review, we found out that there's not a lot of experimental work to validate the simulations with. So we started with looking at the particle sizes that are available from experimental works, mostly at the time was the work of Dr. Manzello at NIST. And we tried to build a small scale version of this process in the wind tunnel. As you can see, this is the wind tunnel test section that we had at the University of Clemson, where we built a jet underneath the test section. And we released these tiny model firebrands in the jet. And basically the interaction of the jet and the boundary layer that is formed by the wind tunnel creates these trajectories that we captured by camera, and then later we extracted the trajectory. Then we basically consider this as one of the most comprehensive data sets for basically this process. And later we started to looking at developing the model that can simulate the experimental conditions. So we developed a one-way coupled 6 degree of freedom firebrand transport model. And then we coupled it with the larger simulation data based on OpenFOAM, which simulates the release of the basically the jet and the boundary layer on that comes from the left to the right. And after doing the coupling and releasing these particles, this is the result of the simulation that you can see. This is the Q criterion, color-coded with velocity, and also these kind of lines are the resolved firebrands. If we kind of collect the landing location of the firebrands, and average them for each experimental case that we've done. And we have shown this in the horizontal axis here. And then compare it with the corresponding numerical simulation. You can see that on average, we are doing a good job because most of these are falling in the line with the slope 1. And it shows that the model that we developed is capable of predicting the average trajectories or estimate the landing distributions well. This is, I would like to mention that these particles are orders of magnitude larger than the aerosolized particles that I was talking about. These are centimeter scale. But unfortunately, because of the short time that we had there are still some remaining questions or needs that need to be addressed, especially the effect of rotation. We know that these particles have different shapes and rotational effects are important. We still don't know the effect of turbulence on the trajectories, and obviously nobody at the time had built a larger scale fire weather interactions and basically in this context and study that. So that's basically where I started my position at San Jose State, where we started to develop a physics-based fire branch shower model with the intention to test it operationally at very large scales. As I mentioned, if you look at these data that are basically updated from recent fires, you can see that the shape of the fire brands can be summarized by cylinders, discs, and spheres, and maybe rods and plates. If you're thinking about the three barks and so on. As I mentioned, we know that from the fluid dynamics that the effect of the shape is very important, as you can see in this simulation. The only thing that is different between these three plates is the orientation. And if you change the orientation slightly, you see that the trajectory is going to be totally different. And that affects the distribution, landing distribution, both in the longitudinal or basically streamwise direction and also the transverse direction. So in order to get that right, we needed to update the governing equations because at the time, the previous model was using the Euler angles, which they have inherent nonlinearity in the way that they solve the kinematic differential equation. So we updated that and we use quaternions now. And then we added basically the mass loss and also temperature evolution. And then we thought about, okay, maybe we need to validate this because we are changing the integrators. And the way that we validated, we used the drop experiments from the work that I had done before during my PhD, where if you release particles of different shapes and sizes from specific heights, and then measure their contact position from the top, then you will get basically a data set that looks like this. You can basically look at the red points on this plot. And then if you calculate the radial distance from the projection of the release point to the ground, and then plot the normalized radial distance with height, then you get these PDF and CDFs. And we've done this with our model, a numerical model as well. As you can see, we are doing a good job in predicting the PDF and CDF of this random process. We also effectively started looking at the performance of the KDE method or KDE integration. And for that, we are using a typical kind of test that people in simulating the debris transport model always do, where basically they release a particle with zero angle of attack through the wind tunnel from different heights, and then they record the trajectory. You can find this sample trajectory in basically works of Richard in a wind tunnel. And we have done this numerically for different release heights different release angles. The case that corresponds with the experiments of Richard is basically the line with magenta. As you can see, it basically matches pretty well, and this is a relatively old study. What is important, here is that I want to show that the evolution of the angular velocity, which is bounded and it is effectively resolved. If you use Euler angles, there's a high chance that at some point one of your components, angular velocity components, hits the singularity, and you get a very large, basically angular velocity, which is not physically possible. And the testament to that is basically the log of the norm of the quaternion vector, which remains virtually zero throughout the trajectory for all of these, which basically confirms that the way that we do these integrations without any normalization, which is common practice, is accurate enough. All right, so after the validation, we started to look at the LES simulations again, because we wanted to study the effect of turbulence on the trajectory. But this LES simulation is different from the OpenFOAM simulation that I just mentioned that we did during the PhD work, because we wanted to have a CFD model that can accurately represent the entire realized spectrum in the flow. And for that, we use a finite difference solver with the accuracy with 6 degrees accuracy, or six orders of magnitude accuracy, called X-Compact3D. And very fine meshes, which leads to these resolved velocity field. And here is the Q criterion again, that you can see it. And then on the right-hand side, you can see the comparison between the resolved boundary layer profile between our case at 2 different turbulence intensities, 4% and 7%, and the experimental data from the wind tunnel tests, which are in pretty good agreements, and you can estimate it with the power law fit. Also, we continued the simulations long enough to ensure that we resolve all the possible eddies in the LES context. And you can look at the power spectral density plots for 4% and 7% cases. And you can see that they're basically hitting the Kolmogorov scale. After doing that, we started to release particles of different shapes, mostly rods and plates, from different heights through the wind tunnel test section. And on the top left, you see the sample trajectories that are resolved. On the top view, basically, these are the trajectories, and you see the front view. But if you, again, collect the landing locations of these particles in the longitudinal direction, basically this direction, for the plates and barks and rods and cylinders, you see a very kind of important observation, especially if you do these releases through instantaneous velocities and also time average velocities from the LES. So in these two plots, the black line shows the instant results from the instantaneous velocity field, and the red line shows the results from releasing these particles through a time averaged, basically, velocity field. For plates and barks, surprisingly, the turbulent eddies leads to basically a shorter flight distance. But for rods, it's basically not really conclusive. We also did this difference plots that you can see on the top right, where we calculated difference of the landed particles at the given location for plates and rods for the turbulence intensity of 7%. And as you can see, plates effectively travel far, and you see a lot of differences at the maximum landing locations, whereas rods, you see these binomial difference throughout the domain. So in order to characterize this effect of turbulence really well, what happens if you increase the turbulence intensity, we ended up visualizing the number of simulations that we've done using this plot. So on the horizontal axis, you see the average landing location of these cases with a turbulence intensity of 4% through the instantaneous velocity field, compared with the same but the increased turbulence intensity. And each of these dots are corresponding to simulation cases at different heights. So the left plot is for plates, and the right one is for rods. And as you can see, for plates, as you increase the release height, the effect of turbulence intensity picks up. By increasing the turbulence intensity, you end up basically having a larger travel distance. But for rods, it virtually doesn't make a lot of difference, at least on the average. So that's an ongoing work. This is from the work that Antonio, who was a master's student in my research group, did. And he's now doing his PhD at UCI on understanding the effects of turbulence on these particles. So hopefully we can get this work out very soon. Now, we talked a little bit about the effects of turbulence on the trajectory of these particles. I want to show you the results that we have for coupling this model that we experimentally validated, and then we used to study the turbulence effects on larger scale. So we use the same coupling approach that I talked about for bioaerosols with firebrands, which are orders of magnitude larger particles. And we coupled it with an operational solver called Worfest Fire. And this is a very famous fire weather model that we use in the US for forecasting wildfires. And this simulation that you see is for the creek fire. The simulation domain is 40 kilometer by 40 kilometer by 10,000 meters elevation. And these are the resolved trajectories, basically. So all these tiny dots that you see light up, these are actually trajectories of 100 meters or maybe 10 meters. But since the scale of the problem is very large, you see them as dots. And only a handful of them, they get lofted through the updraft of the quickfire. And you see these kind of spaghetti-like trajectories. That's we have the maximum lofted height of 8 kilometer and the maximum travel distance of 29 and a half kilometer. On the right-hand side, you see the time history of this fire. The red polygons are showing you the predicted fire boundary from Morpheus fire, which is being assimilated with the hotspots from the satellite images. And all of these are shown with the red polygons. Compared with these, again, the dots show you the aggregate number of particles that land per pixel. And as you can see, the firebrand model, as time goes by, has this capability to at least predict the next spots, the direction of the next spot fire, and in some cases, it exactly hits it. So this is the work that we've done on a larger scale, and it is not fully operational, although it is this model is also on GPUs. But since Morpheus Fire is using a multi-threaded processing or MPI, it's very difficult to work these two together. So we are trying to find ways to kind of merge them into one platform, and then hopefully this will be operational soon as well. All right. So this was the work that I've done on wildfire behavior directly in understanding different processes. And one other thing that I kind of forgot to mention about this model of Firebrand's shower, it has this big limitation that it doesn't create any feedback loop from the landing position to the actual fire spread. We have another project, it's funded by NSF, where we are focusing on the spot ignition of these firebrands, specifically focused on how much heat is being transferred from the particles to the recipient surface. But for the interest of time, I try to kind of cut that part, and then hopefully I will have another chance to talk about it soon in the future. Now, I want to talk about some of the new directions that we are going, and start by building a case for a computational approach for wildfire modeling. If you look at the way that we build models for wildfires, and this can be effectively true for most of the phenomena that we think about, we usually start with some observations, and then maybe we collect information about the wind, about the flame length, flame heights, maybe some information about the fuel. And then if we increase these observations, we start to hypothesize a mathematical model. And then this has happened basically by the work of Rothamol, as I mentioned, leading to this very simple one-dimensional equation, which is great and is still working for us. And a lot of people have used this model, added a lot of other modules to it, and rasterize it in different ways. Cellular automata models, we have level set models, and so on. But because of the simplifications that are inherent in this modeling approach, or this model per se specifically, where we are ignoring the dependence of the reaction intensities to a species, the heterogeneity of the fuels, pressure, temperature, and so on. All these, simplifications lead to information loss. And as a result, we are losing a lot of these reciprocating interactions that really needs to be in the model. It has two consequences. One, our forecasts are going to have a lot of uncertainty in them, unfortunately. And also, if you want to improve the model using this kind of way or platform, you will have a lot of singularity or instabilities, as is the case with the flux-driven models that are available. And as a result, you will have this generalization issue that you can't kind of generalize your model to a variety of different scenarios. So what we want to do now, or we've started to do, is to be able to take a different approach where we are focusing on the observational data with this intention that maybe we can use the observations to our advantage and work on this problem and solving some of the kind of information loss in our model. So the first project that we are doing, and it is funded by the Industry Advisory Board at the center, is curating a database of observational data. So we have access through one of our IB members to high resolution infrared imagery from aerial observations of wildfires, where you see that this is the flight path of the airplane with the IR sensors um, that they have, and they go through the area near the fire. They basically take all these images that you can see at these as these tiny kind of areas, and then we get access to these images. We implement some segmentation algorithms. We improve the quality of the fire areas, as you can see in this image. And then, unfortunately, this method that we currently have picks up a lot of train features too, as you can see in this part of the image, and as well as the fires. So we started to develop our expert annotation pipeline where we receive these images, we take them through an auto labeler, and then we have graduate students kind of using that platform and annotate the fire areas so we can separate them from the non-fire areas. Similar to this kind of red lines that you see in these images. And this will help us to effectively have a set of georeferenced data set for the progression of wildfires. And these are some of the preliminary results that you see that we get these nice progression from these aerial images of the wildfires. And the good thing about the way we built this platform is that you can do concurrent processing, meaning that you can let this to be run on as many CPUs as you have access to in your clusters. So you're seeing two region of interest or ROI samples that I'm showing, and this work is still in its infancy. So hopefully we can extend it and complete the data set. Another kind of project that's is indirectly related to this initiative, and we are again trying to improve on the data modeling effectively perspective, is to use a synthetic simulation data that we received from one of our collaborators, Dr. Hodges. And this data includes effectively the simulation data from Behave Plus or some version of it, where we had information from fuel, weather, landscape, and all of that, it basically goes and we kind of you have a combination of both kind of a static data or static data layers and time varying or time evolving layers. What we did was to, after getting access to this data, we started to make it spatially explicit in a sense that some of these needed some special treatments such that it can work with the algorithms that we are envisioning. And then after that, which is a lot of data engineering, we kind of divide the data set into train validation tests, creating features and targets. And all of these go through a typical data preparation pipeline for a machine learning model, where we have features, embeddings, scaling, and so on, all the way through the data loaders that we have. So if you take this approach, the task is to, given these simulations from Farsight or maybe a family of it, Behave Plus, you have all these data layers and you also have the fire progression using the simulations. If you use the data engineer pipeline that we just showed, you will be able to try different architectures on this data set, starting with CNN, which is a sequential CNN model. What you see here is that this is the prediction by the fire model. In the middle, you see the prediction by the CNN or trained CNN model. And on the right-hand side, you see the error or the difference between them. And this is basically a probability map. So I'm going to play it. And as you can see, initially it does a good job in predicting the same in through time. But as you kind of go through time, the errors accumulate and you have a lot of inaccuracies, especially in the areas that you have the presence of some features such as wind being exacerbated. So we decided to change the architecture, and we recently finished, as I mentioned, Behi today defended her thesis. We finished implementation of Conval STM, and we see that it makes improvements in terms of the error propagation. And what you see again on the left-hand side, these are two samples, two different samples, is the simulation that we have, or synthetic simulation. In the middle, you have the corresponding Conval STM prediction, and on the right-hand side, you have the prediction error. And since these are probabilities, you can actually see where you have the highest error. In this specific cases, you can see that for the majority of them, we have errors less than 50%, which is a pretty good news. You only see a handful of kind of the yellowish to whitish area, specifically with this one. This means that if we invest more time on getting the temporal effects into the simulations, we can probably use that to be a good model for ensemble, applications. There is this, tendency that's a lot of people would like to do ensemble forecasts, whether it is a linear or nonlinear model. Whether it is work, that's a different topic for discussion. But since these inference models are quite fast, you can use that for that purpose. And also you can use these data set to identify reliable architectures for future developments. Maybe if you have access to a very good data set, you can kind of start developing from the identified architecture here. So that was really the intention of this work that hopefully we can publish soon. In terms of the limitations, there are many. The first one is that it's going to be as good as the solver that provided the data for you. So by any means, you cannot kind of extend it to extrapolate beyond the out of sample cases. That is not possible, especially with the loss functions that we are using currently. There is no fire weather interaction. There is no sensitivity to the firebrand shower. There is this option in Behave Plus or Farsight that you can see the effect of spotting, but that's not physically characterized to the best of my knowledge. And also, using these models are difficult to explain them, but it's not impossible. You have some ways of bringing explainability in your kind of models. But this is an ongoing work, and hopefully we can extend it for future. And I would like to thank the sponsors of our work, especially NSF, through different grants, San Jose State Tower Foundation, the Industrial Advisory Board members of the center, and also IBM, who was the first company to support us with the AI work. And I would like to also thank all of you for listening, and I'm happy to take any and all questions.
Thank you, Ellie. Excellent talk.
Thank
Uh,
you.
Let me just use my privilege to ask first question. So
Sure.
when I see you talking about the firebrand transportation, I see you have some very nice animations showing the rotation of the
Yeah,
firebrand particles.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
uh, can you share some details how these kind of like animation or simulation is generated?
Oh,
It's
that's this one you
yeah, this
mentioned.
one.
Okay, so yeah, that's great. The outputs of the solver that we have provides you with the location of the centroid of this particle. You have information about the shape of the particle too, right? And using VTK, there's like a Python package called VTK. You can kind of use a software called ParaView that reads the outputs of the VTK in a VTK format, basically location, the quaternions, as well as the shape, and then it generates these trajectories for you. Specifically, what I've done in order to get the entire trajectory is that first you need to load the entire trajectory data, and then do a time filter. So it goes through the entire time steps with one kind of a they call it wireframe, and then you can add another layer, basically take it through time. So it's all done by VTK and ParaView, sorry.
So these kind of like some function in Python that can visualize it.
Yeah, if you have the bare minimum information, meaning that the centroid and also the quaternions, or maybe if you are using Euler angles, the theta x, theta y, and theta z, ParaView should be able to do it with one of the predefined um, kind of particles or glyph modes in there.
Okay, so that's very interesting because for example we're also simulating like a dripping process. So I
Oh,
feel like
nice.
using similar techniques can show very nice.
Yeah, that'll be great. I can find this case, the PV review, PV view file, and then send it to you if you like. But I need some time to find it. It's been a long time.
Yes, yeah,
Yeah.
thanks. A second question is for the first part, the bacteria, the fungal
Yeah.
transportation. That's very interesting. Yeah, up to a point, I may even feel some of the trees may use the wildland fire to transport their seeds to another area.
Yeah, well, that's I never thought of it. Yeah, it is
But
possible. Yeah.
a seed is much larger and they are easier to be destroyed by fire. But could be.
Yeah, yeah, that's definitely doable, I guess. And as long as you can have these, large firebrands that we see in the field to travel these distances, I can see that happening, although stochastically and randomly for seeds as well. So yeah,
So for example, like the what's a pie corn,
yeah,
it it has some seeds inside. Uh,
yeah.
but it will break into many small pieces of fibrands, but some may survive.
True, yeah, yeah. I've seen a lot of, pine cones in Twitter, images from, these being burned and then, left at long distances. But yeah, we looked at it only from the perspective of, bacteria and very small aerosolized particles. I never thought of seeds. That's a very interesting
Well, we
thing.
can try.
Yeah, absolutely. That's
So
great.
any other questions from the audience? Actually, I have a few students working on similar area.
Oh, that's great.
Maybe we'll ask some
Definitely
questions.
talk then.
Ijo, do you have any question? Sharon?
Oh, yes. I already have that in the chat box. And yeah,
Okay. I did
yeah,
not
thank you.
see the chat box. Sorry. Let's see.
He's asking about the output of the CNN.
Yes. Yes, the inputs are basically the same for both of the architectures, and the outputs are also the same. The basically softmax is the last layer in both of them, so you get the probabilities of the fire.
By the way, do you have some like extra data to verify the model?
This is specific model, no, because as I mentioned, these are synthetic simulations, right? Let's say, imagine the entire California, right? Having the field maps and all the other LCP files and vegetation and so on, and you randomly start ignition points in the middle of those bounding boxes. So these are entirely synthetic. These are not actual simulations.
But actually, you have a lot of like campfire or these fire. You will have
Yes,
the GIS data.
that is true. Working on reconstruction of that fire with this AI model is going to be a project itself, but hopefully in future we can do it because first you need a good solver um, to have access to those features and then generate those features for us. And then you're talking about the fuel layers, the wind, getting that accurately is also important. But yeah, we have this, we have the model is trained on synthetic data now. It seems to be doing good predictions on the test set, but we haven't validated.
I mean, as long as you can verify the FASAT model, I mean,
Yeah,
the simulation itself with the experiment data, then we can conclude the simulation is accurate. Then we run the database.
yes, that is true. And yeah, as I mentioned, it will be at least a MS thesis on its own. It's a little bit of work. It's not
And there's another question
trivial. Yeah,
in the chat.
that's a very nice question. Thank you.
Another question, what's the difference between using FASAT and WRF fire?
Yeah, warp fire.
What fire?
Yeah. I would say there's a lot of differences, but from the standpoint of fire modeling, Farsight, you can think of it as like a 2D model that incorporates the effects of wind and topography in 2D maps, whereas Warfire is more like a 3D model that incorporates the effects of, topography and the actual, wind. There's basically this bigger part of Warface Fire that is used for modeling the atmospheric, flows. So you are actually modeling the interaction of the fire with the boundary layer and see these reciprocating interactions effects on the fire growth. Although there are some versions of, or the main version of WRF, if I'm not mistaken, uses the same model as Farsight at its core for progressing fire, with this difference that it is coupled with the boundary layer simulator. So that's one of the major differences. But the rest in terms of the fire modeling is very similar.
Yeah, I think Sharon is asking for the M fire model. What's the difference?
In Michael's model, oh, I see. Elm-Fire model is kind of falls within the same category as Farsight. If I'm not mistaken, it is a 2D model, but the way that it effectively kind of progresses fire is based on a level set, method. You need to solve basically a diffusion model as a surrogate for fire. And it has a lot of, options. Recently there has been a lot of active development in Elm Fire. I recently read a paper that they even have kind of a WUI modeling aspects in it, and they can account for firebrands and so on using the distributions from Dr. Peyo's work in Sardoi. So I would say it's much more developed than old versions of Farsight, but pretty much in the same category. And no fire weather interactions, basically, so similar to WRF.
Yeah, I guess eventually all these models can be combined, including the bacterial transportation, together into one model, so you can see the effect on different dimensions of the fire.
Yeah, that's the goal. We'll see.
Yes, so any other questions from the audience? Okay, seems like that's all for it. Let's thank our speaker, Dr. Ali Tohidi again.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Thank you for having me, Dr. Juan.
Yes, okay, see you.
Thank you. Bye. Bye, everyone.